interesting talk as the first speaker for today. Without further ado, I don't want to steal any of your on-screen time, Anna. So I will have you share screen and give us a little bit of your knowledge. Time, Anna. So I will have you share screen and give us a little bit of your knowledge. Time, Anna. So and I think I'm not sure if you have open mic on the stream, but make sure that I don't have any echo.
That's not for me.
So you're on.
Okay, can you hear me? That's not for me.
I can hear you perfectly fine.
Okay.
So you're on.
All right. Hi, everyone. Okay, can you hear me?
That's not for me. I can hear you perfectly fine.
Okay.
So you're on.
Sorry about that. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna. Thank you so much for the warm introduction. It's so great to be here with all of you. I am new to TypeScript. I'm pretty new to React, and I'm pretty new to programming. And it can definitely be scary admitting that you're new to something. And that's pretty much been the theme of my last 18 months. A year and a half ago, I changed careers and decided to become a software engineer, to start as a beginner in a new field. I'm still on my own journey to feeling comfortable as a beginner, but my experience the last few months with TypeScript has been an important part of my path to becoming a confident engineer and a proud beginner with any new technology. To give a little rundown of what I'll be talking about today, I'll share my path to programming and how an early introduction to computer science shaped my experience breaking into engineering. I'll talk about my first time working with TypeScript after getting comfortable with JavaScript React, what I came into the language knowing and how I really misunderstood the language at first, and how overcoming roadblocks in TypeScript React really helped me develop a framework for overcoming challenges. And I'll share that framework with you, and how that framework helped me turn TypeScript into my most helpful pairing buddy as I came to understand the true power of the language with React. What I want you to come away with is for people new to programming, new to TypeScript, new to React, and those managing people new to programming TypeScript or React, I'll share my learning of how to get over roadblocks when learning the language. I'll convey the real power of TypeScript and why I think TypeScript is awesome, and why the value prop that most resonated with me was different from what I initially heard going in. I'll talk openly about facing challenges in your career and learning new technologies, especially when coming to engineering from a non-traditional background like me, and how overcoming setbacks and tackling something new are two of the most important skills to develop as a new software engineer, regardless of your level. So I'll talk a little bit about sort of my path to programming, where the sphere of starting as a beginner initially began, and how hitting setbacks early in my journey really primed me to feel like I didn't know what I was doing, a feeling that I would come back to early on in my time as an engineer. So, roadblocks. Humans like to plan, we like predictability, we like to know what we're doing, we like what's next, and we like a smooth path ahead of us. If this crazy year has taught us anything, it's that life is full of roadblocks. The world is constantly throwing us unwelcome surprises that gets in the way of our plans. One of the core experiences of any software engineer is feeling blocked.
Anna, mind if I cut in for a second?
Yeah.
I think you're also sharing your presenter notes.
Oh, sorry about that. Sorry about that.
Nice.
Can I share again?
Yeah, of course.
I think do you know how to unshare?
There should be a hover somewhere that says stop sharing on the screen you're sharing.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, perfect. Right. I guess, guys, we have a minor technical problem with Anna, but I will invite her back in. I guess you just clicked the wrong button or something and actually left the call. But yeah,
Okay.
it's fine. It happens.
Okay, I think I got it.
Yeah.
So can I just play for you so we can test it?
Yeah, go for it, please.
Am I live?
Yeah, you're live.
Okay.
You have an empty screen, blank screen right now. You're sharing your desktop.
Can you see
And
the?
now I can see the presentation. Yes.
Perfect. Okay, sorry about that, everyone.
Awesome.
So one of the core experiences, as I was saying, of a software engineer is feeling blocked. So what is feeling blocked in programming? It's when you hit a point in your code and you're not sure how to proceed. There's a bug you can't figure out or a concept you don't understand. Programming is really all about hitting roadblocks. So building the skills to overcoming them is core to growing as an engineer. And as we see, there's unexpected things that happen, technical difficulties, messing up in a presentation like this. And it's definitely the skills that I develop in programming that kind of help you move right through these kinds of challenges. So yes, these challenges come up in all aspects. And for me, encountering hurdles has really fueled my fear of being a beginner. It became this vicious cycle of hitting a roadblock, which is uncomfortable, fostering a fear of starting as a beginner, and then hitting more roadblocks and so on. So here's how the cycle started for me. 10 years ago, I moved to Berkeley from New York on a campus with people who would go on to build some of the most exciting tech companies that we have. Uber was just releasing its first cars across the bay. The movie The Social Network had just come out, and I wanted in. Programming seemed like this awesome mix of problem solving and creative building, and a skill that would open up many doors for me. But this is what my class looked like. Thousands of students, primarily male identifying, and the majority of whom had prior experience programming, AKA not beginners. And I really, really struggled in these classes. While I was struggling through these introductory classes, I had a lot of other interests on campus, from art history to the school newspaper to a sorority and a student co-op. And I couldn't spend all night in the computer lab, which is honestly what I needed to make it through these classes. After my third computer science class, an idea was bashing me over the head. Computer science isn't for me. I don't look like these people. I don't share the same interests as them. At the time, I felt like I was not as smart as them. Ultimately, I decided to drop the computer science major and to dive into my humanities interests. And since I became a software engineer, I've been told that making it through even just these first few classes would have qualified me to get an entry-level computer science role. But getting knocked down and not believing in myself, I'm really sharing this because it caused me to veer away from programming. And it's really only by chance that I ended up finding my way back. After I graduated from Berkeley, I moved to New York and joined Artsy, a startup in the art world with an incredible engineering team. I joined as a communications manager. At Artsy, the coolest people at the company were software engineers. They were really talented technologists, but also loved the things I love, like art and music. They loved sharing their knowledge with others and even taught programming course for non-engineers where we learned some of the basics of JavaScript. A big part of my job on communications was working to share the software that they were building with the world. And any chance I had to collaborate with them, I jumped at it. I was so close to the magic of engineering, but at the same time, I was very far away. I was interested in what the product team was doing that I asked to transfer to their team. But shortly after, there was a big restructuring at the company and I actually got laid off. And getting laid off was hard, but it was exactly what I needed to make a big change in my career. A couple months later, I enrolled in a boot camp in New York and was back on the path I started on my freshman year of college. Somewhat to my surprise, I totally fell in love with programming. I met a lot of people from all different kinds of backgrounds and people who were changing careers just like me. I particularly fell for React and the self-contained and modular nature. I loved Legos as a kid, so I loved building components and piecing them together. But it was not without its challenges. Of course, hitting a roadblock, whether getting my butt kicked in computer science or getting laid off from my first job or just reaching a point in my code where I did not know how to proceed, really familiarized me with the feelings of failure and also made it easy to come back to the feeling of, holy shit, I have no idea what I'm doing. When I couldn't figure out a bug in my code or grasp a new concept, I would experience these feelings of inadequacy and that I wasn't smart or good enough, which would later come up for me when I was learning TypeScript. After bootcamp, I ended up getting hired back at Artsy as an engineer in November of last year. In my first few weeks on the job at Artsy, I encountered so many new technologies. We're a React and Ruby on Rails shop, which I knew from my bootcamp, but parts of our stack like GraphQL, we use Relay, and TypeScript were totally new to me. I was always asking a million questions and felt like, yes, indeed, I had no idea what I was doing. So here we are, Anna meets TypeScript. A little context on the history of Artsy and React and TypeScript. We use React on our front end, and we've used TypeScript in most of our front end code for the last 5 years or so before I joined the engineering team. In my first few weeks on the team, as an engineer, I read this blog post explaining the basics of TypeScript and why we use it at the company. Back in that giant lecture hall in college, one of the concepts that later proved useful was learning the difference between a statically and dynamically typed language. One of the introductory courses was taught in Java, so I knew this. If you declare an integer so if you declare a variable as an integer and then assign it to 50, we're good. If you assign it to a string, we get a compilation error. So the post actually makes this comparison with TypeScript and kind of understanding TypeScript through the lens of Java as a statically typed language was really helpful in my building my understanding. The post also talks about how TypeScript gave developers on the team, and particularly those working on our iOS app, which was in React Native, assurance that changes that was made in one part of the code didn't have unexpected and negative consequences in another part of the code. This brought a lot of value to the team. The point reflected a conversation that I had heard at a company that I was interning for after my bootcamp and before I joined Artsy. The engineering team that I was on was debating converting their React front end into using TypeScript. And the debate really boiled down to, one, the bandwidth and overhead needed to do the conversion versus that it creates a much safer code base and drastically reduces the risk of introducing bugs into your code, reflecting the argument in the blog post. I'm sure a lot of other companies have had this debate or are having it now. So this is really the primer I had when I opened my first TypeScript file. I'm going to walk us through a basic code example inspired by a task I had in my first few weeks on the job and very, very early days in my days working with TypeScript and React. The example is pared down for simplicity, but the idea is to give a sense of my thought process and the experience I had as I walked through TypeScript code. This is the part of the website that we'll be looking at. This is the artwork page, the really core part of our client app. At Artsy, we sell millions of artworks, and every artwork has a page that looks like this. And with the artwork on the left and information about the artwork on the right, we'll be diving into this part on the right that specifically talks about the dimensions, so it's height, width, and depth. You'll see that on the right. So to open the component, it's called artwork sidebar metadata. This is what it looks like. For a quick tour, we have our interface defined at the top of the file. We have the component definition, which says that we're returning a React functional component and that it takes in these predefined props, and a box that renders the dimensions. And we're going to start to add additional pieces of dimensions data to this area of the code. So I was doing a little refactor and moving the dimensions into their own component. So here's what that looks like at first. I wrote the component as if it was normal React, something that I knew was pretty comfortable with. And we are formatting a string to show the dimensions in a text box on the page. But here, the yellow squiggly line starts to rear its head. This is coming from our linter. And some light annoyance and maybe a little panic starts to set in, but we'll move forward. So I hastily went back into the parent and did some pattern matching, copying and pasting the function definition to say that we're returning a React functional component with this props. Now we have a red squiggly line. We haven't actually defined these props yet. And when I saw these red and yellow squiggly lines, I would often hear a voice in my head. You did something wrong. You messed something up. You broke something. It was like this TypeScript monster was waving its hand in my face saying, ha, you're bad at this. Again, with some pattern matching and some frantic typing, I typed out the props copying from the parent file. The next step was to add in a new dimension for frame width, indicating the width of a frame that might add an extra inch or two to the total dimensions. In a regular React file, I know that the dimensions object coming in from the parent definitely has frame width on it. My team did the backend work to add that to the model, but we have this other red squiggly line popping up. Okay, so I guess I had to add that new dimension to the prop definition and feeling pretty good about myself for figuring that out. But no, if I go back to the parent file, I see a new error pop up, which is where I'm rendering the dimensions component. I'm starting to feel like this poor little guy whack-a-moling all of these errors. I fix one and another one pops up. As I fix these errors going up the component tree, I would create more errors and in components I wasn't even working in. This process and also dealing with more complex type errors made me feel like I was breaking everything. And this is when the TypeScript monster really starts to rear his darker side. He was no longer just an annoying pest, but actually making me a little scared that I was never going to squash all of these errors, and that I really didn't know how to write React code. At best, it felt like just another thing to check off my to-do list, maybe adding an extra 20 to 30% of extra dev time. And at its worst, TypeScript squiggly lines really made me feel like I was a bad developer. At this point, when I thought back to the time versus safety argument, I was pretty squarely on team anti-TypeScript. I wasn't really experiencing the upside, the roadblocks were getting to me, and I really needed to find a better way to work through these errors that actually helped me learn the language. So here's how I learned to overcome TypeScript roadblocks in React and become a more comfortable beginner. When I encountered the TypeScript monster, one of my first instincts was often to ask for help. I think a lot of early career engineers really struggle with asking for help because either they ask for help too soon as they hit a roadblock in that kind of panic mode, or they're afraid to ask for help at all. I've definitely fallen in both of these camps because asking for help can really feel like the easy way out and you're admitting defeat. Or I was often really afraid to waste my team members' time or expose myself as less smart or less skilled than they might have originally thought. Creating a culture that encourages people to ask for help is really critical to an engineering organization. And fortunately, pairing is a really big part of the culture at Artsy and is part of my everyday. But what I got wrong at the beginning when I first started as a developer, and I think a lot of engineers get wrong, is when to ask for help. TypeScript taught me a beneficial framework for working through roadblocks myself and also for prepping me to ask for assistance to help others unblock me. Walking through some components we just looked at, I'll trace through the thought process I had and that I landed on for getting through a TypeScript roadblock. So to start, number one, take a breath, slow down. I see the red squiggly lines, and instead of racing to get rid of the error and frantically pattern matching, I made sure to take a breath, slow down first. Number two, read the error. I actually hovered over the error and read it slowly and read it a few times. Errors can be hard to read and kind of intimidating at first, but if I read them more closely, I was able to see that the error was often telling me exactly what to do. If you still need help, read the documentation. TypeScript has a lot of really helpful docs that walk you through common issues and topics that actually explain why the language is structured this way and why these errors pop up. I even came across this paragraph that helped validate my fear of being a TypeScript React beginner. Troubleshooting handbook for types. Facing weird type errors, you aren't alone. This is the hardest part of using TypeScript with React. Be patient. You are learning a new language after all. However, the more you get good at this, the less time you'll be working against the compiler and the more the compiler will be working for you. This is a really key point. How do I get TypeScript to work for me? Spending time reading through the documentations and reading errors got me thinking about how much time I spend reading as an engineer. Sometimes I even felt self-conscious that I was reading more than I was writing code, which I thought was what you're supposed to do as a developer. The aha moment, and something that they really don't teach you in bootcamp, was coding is as much about reading as it is about writing. But not just reading documentation and errors, actually being in the editor and reading the code itself. So this is the big turning point in my journey of learning TypeScript and React. And this is when TypeScript became my most helpful pairing buddy. A couple months after I was working on this component, I came back to it because I had to use this component in a different part of the code base. And reading through this TypeScript component that I had written, I could immediately grasp what was happening inside. In just a few seconds, I had a really thorough understanding of the component's purpose and functionality, what data it would be receiving, what the shape of the data would look like. And the interface was like my own personal treasure map key. The component definition was a guide to use of how to use the component in other places, what it would return, what it would take in. And as I said at the start of my presentation, I flipped my life upside down because I wanted to become a software engineer because I wanted to build. The editor also services all this like documentation, autocomplete, IntelliSense if your editor is set up properly. And it actually does a lot of the work for you. So you see if I type dimensions and an F, it actually like tells me that frame width is an option for me to use here. It was really like magic. So that brings us to number 4, read the code. I realized how much rich information is in the code and the editor provides to me because we're using TypeScript. And as a developer in a new language and a new code base, the more I'm able to absorb from reading the code, the more I learn and the more efficient I am at my job. And TypeScript actually taught me how to be a better code reader. And here's where we're getting to this idea from the documentation. Letting the TypeScript compiler work for me in my React files, not against me. And that's what made the TypeScript monster my friend, my most helpful pairing buddy, silently guiding me through my development work. Having the TypeScript monster by my side, I really felt empowered to make it through roadblocks in TypeScript React files. But also, when the TypeScript monster couldn't quite get me through, he made me infinitely better at asking questions. So by reading the error, the documentation, and the code, I was armed with a lot of context and knowledge that helped me better frame my questions and bring questions to my colleagues. So because they were more informed and more thoughtful, my team was always able to unblock me much more quickly. So the final step, number 5, when in doubt and you completed steps 1 through 4, ask for help. These 5 steps completely shifted my experience with TypeScript and React. When I thought back to the original argument of time and effort versus safety and how I understood this to be the primary trade-off with TypeScript, I realized that I was missing from the argument was the tools and context TypeScript has built into the language and how it integrates into my editor to help me through. Having this missing piece of the benefit of making me a better reader, that was really a benefit that resonated with me. The journey of learning this true power of TypeScript really accelerated my learning and made me a much more confident developer. And a key realization for me, and I hope that others who are learning new technologies, again, whether you're a new developer or not, and also for their managers, is that when learning a new technology, it's really important to understand why it's powerful for you, the value prop that most resonates with you. And not just what I heard from Twitter or blog posts or even my coworkers. I had to understand the power and then experience it firsthand. So I've come a long way from the shakiness I first experienced when I opened my first TypeScript file and felt the uneasiness and imposter syndrome that's so common in our industry, and especially from people with non-traditional backgrounds. And walking through those 5 steps for overcoming hurdles in TypeScript React, experiencing why the language was powerful for me, really accelerated my development. And now I feel empowered to move into my next phase of learning in TypeScript and React, because I've really only just scratched the surface. And to tackle these roadblocks head on and really own being a beginner. So thank you so much all for listening in and for bearing with me through any of technical difficulties. I really appreciate it. And please feel free to reach out to me. I love talking about breaking into tech, career changers, diversity in software engineering, and learning new technologies. I'd like to thank my friend Michelle Kersner for dreaming up the TypeScript monster, and all the awesome devs at Artsy, past and present, who have supported me and helped inspire my path to becoming an engineer. And also, Artsy is hiring, so come write TypeScript and React with me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Very interesting talk for sure, and thanks for sharing all the the past bumps you had to get over to be who you are today. I'm sure, and as I see from the chat, actually, there's a lot of people agreeing with you, me being one of them as well, obviously, right? Most engineers have to get through this stuff for sure. So I think that pretty much covers up this talk, guys. We can speak in about 10 minutes with our next talk with Attila. Be sure to check out the next URL in the playlist that you got in the email, and we'll see you there in about 10 minutes. Again, thank you very much, Anna. We all wish you a great day.